Thanks everybody for joining us today. Just our quick standard disclaimer, this presentation is for educational purposes only. It is not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship on its own. Also, we're just basically providing an overview today. If you're already a client and you have a question, you can send it in through our portal. If you're not a client, but you'd like help with a specific legal issue in this area, we'll have some information at the end on how you can sign up and get services from us. Just as a overview, we assist clients every day with documents and questions regarding documents. So this is an area that we are very, very familiar with, and we'll try to keep things moving, as I like to say, so that you can get on with your day. So discussing the 7 essential must-have documents for every employer. Let's start off with one that begins the employment relationship in many cases. Document number 1, the offer letter. So what is an offer letter? That may sound like a basic question, but sometimes it's good to give a little bit of background as we get into a topic, just so everybody has that foundation in place. Well, an offer letter is a formal document from an employer to a job candidate. It puts in writing the details and terms and conditions of a job offer. So what is the job title that's being offered? What is the start date? How much pay? What are the benefits? Is the position exempt or non-exempt? What's the work schedule going to be? Those are some very important topics that it's important to address at the beginning of the employment relationship, and an offer letter can help an employer do that. An offer letter can also list some preconditions that must be met in order for a candidate to whom an offer is extended so that they can be hired. So do you have a background check requirement? Is there a drug screen? Does your company perform reference checks? Does the candidate need any professional certifications in order to begin work? Those are items that can be addressed in the offer letter. Another kind of important area in the offer letter, and this covers the majority of workers in the United States, is something relating to at-will employment. If the employee is going to be employed at will, that should be stated very clearly in the offer letter. So what is at-will employment? Just as a quick refresher, it means the employee has no employment contract. There is no promise of employment by the employer to the employee for a specific period of time, and the employee is not covered under a union collective bargaining agreement. So again, at-will employees are the vast majority of workers in the US. If you're going to be hiring somebody as an at-will employee, you should state that in the offer letter. It's very important. Maybe even put it in bold. The reason why I'm emphasizing the at-will employment piece is that it gives you as the employer the most flexibility with an employee. If you've got somebody employed at will, they can be let go at any time, with or without notice, and without cause for any legal reason. So it just gives you an opportunity. If something is going wrong with somebody, you can get rid of them more easily if they're an at-will employee. So what an offer letter does and why it's a must-have document is that it's providing protection for your business. It's a best practice to use an offer letter with hiring because it's going to clarify the terms of employment for both the employer and the employee. So that just limits surprises from either side. It also helps you get ahead of any disputes about the terms the person was hired under, because you're going to have a piece of written evidence that you can point to and say, well, no, that benefit that you're talking about now, that wasn't described in our offer letter, something like that. So being able to avoid hassles with hiring somebody over time regarding the terms of employment, that's an important function of an offer letter. Must-have document number 2, employee handbook. Any of our clients that have worked with us for a while are familiar with our stance on employee handbooks, and that is that having an employee handbook as an employer is very critical. In fact, it's arguably the most critical employment compliance document that an employer can have. If you ever get in a dispute with a former employee and there is an inquiry that comes to your business from either, say, a state agency or a private plaintiff's attorney, the first thing they're going to ask for is your employee handbook. A good employee handbook can protect your organization. We'll talk about why and how it will do that. But a bad employee handbook, equally as important, can help you immediately lose a dispute with an employee. So having a good employee handbook is very critical. So what is an employee handbook? Just as a kind of an overview, it's a document that's distributed by the employer to all employees, and it contains policies that address the employer's legal compliance obligations as an employer. So within your employee handbook, think about provisions for things like wage and hour, or statements regarding anti-harassment and anti-discrimination, employee use of electronic devices, employee use of social media. Are there paid leave requirements in your state? Those would be addressed in your employee handbook. And things like federal unpaid leave under the FMLA, for example, if you're an employer that's covered by FMLA. So those are some of the policies that you would have in an employee handbook to present to your employees. It would also address certain employee expectations as well. So what is not an employee handbook? This, again, is equally important. It's not a document for your operational processes. So what are operational processes? The employee handbook is going to focus on employment law compliance. You don't want operational processes in your employee handbook because those are separate from employment law compliance. So don't have operational processes in your employee handbook for things like parking, phone etiquette, how to close out a till at the end of a shift, how to conduct customer relations. Those items would go into a separate operational manual that an employer would put together themselves because they know what operational processes are used to run their business. That's not going to be in an employee handbook. The employee handbook is, again, going to focus on employment law compliance topics. Safety information also should be in a separate safety manual, not in an employee handbook. So what does an employee handbook do that makes it one of the must-have documents for an employer? Well, it helps protect your business against legal risks. It shows compliance with labor laws. It's going to reduce misunderstandings with employees. And it's also going to provide a consistent reference that both the employer and the employees can go back to make sure that treatment is equal for employees. It's going to help foster an open and positive communication culture because you're going to have policies that people can refer to understand exactly where the company's position is on certain issues. And it's also going to make sure that people understand what the rules are inside the employee handbook for conducting their work as employees. It is really a best practice for an employer to have an employee handbook. And with an employee handbook, you definitely want to have one drafted by an attorney. I would strongly recommend not using a DIY document that someone might find on Google. The reason for that is because it's not going to cover all of the relevant federal, state, and even local laws that you need to address in an employee handbook. I would also recommend not getting an employee handbook from a disclaimed HR advice service versus what we do. We're a law firm and we provide attorney drafted and attorney backed handbooks for employers. So then you're taking out that element of uncertainty with that disclaimer from an HR service, and instead you're getting something drafted by an actual attorney. It's also recommended that you update your handbook. Laws are changing all the time at the federal level, at the state level, and even the city level, depending on where you do business. So your handbook should be updated probably at least annually as a best practice. And that is something that's a big part of what we do, is we do provide employee handbooks to clients. So the third must-have document for employers is going to be an employee discipline policy. An employee discipline policy is a formal company guideline that outlines expected behaviors, unacceptable conduct, and the steps that an employer might take, such as warning, suspension, termination, things like that, to address violations of company rules. Why is it important to have, or even essential to have, an employee discipline policy? Well, it's going to be something that's going to help set clear expectations for your employees. It's going to be visible and it's going to be standardized. Everybody is going to know if there's corrective action that needs to be taken. They're going to be able to refer to your corrective action or discipline policy to see what potentially could be going on. That's going to help you with more positive employee relations because employees are going to understand there's a standard policy in place. That's going to keep things more fair. People are not going to think they're being singled out for unfair treatment. It's also going to help provide some reduction in risk of an employee bringing a claim based, again, on having a visible policy and applying it fairly. Really, an important thing with a discipline policy is having a statement within the policy that the company can take corrective action if somebody has performance issues or if they have policy violations. So some of those corrective action steps within a discipline policy are generally things like it could be verbal counseling, there could be a written warning, there could be a suspension, there could even be a termination. One thing with a discipline policy, though, is to keep it open and to keep it flexible. With that will employment that we discussed a bit ago, you've got the most flexibility as an employer, but also you want to have an open and flexible employee discipline policy to back up at will employment, because again, that's going to give you the most flexibility as an employer. If you've got that open and flexible discipline policy, you as the employer can take a disciplinary action in any order of possible steps and at any time. You could have disciplinary actions with an employee that could be combined, say example, verbal counseling with a suspension, or you could even skip some of the potential steps. You don't want to have a policy that requires very specific steps and a very specific sequence every time. If you have that type of a policy, or if you have a rigid point system policy, this type of infraction means this number of points, and once you hit a total number of points of XYZ, then you're let go. That is not recommended. That is just going to put you into a box as an employer. With a rigid number of steps that have to be taken in order discipline policy or a rigid points driven discipline policy, you are going to have to, as the employer, take the same action with every employee every time. If you don't do that within a rigid policy or a points policy, if you don't follow it exactly for every single thing, then you're going to open yourself up to discrimination or retaliation claims from employees. It'll be much more easy for them to bring that type of claim versus having that open and flexible discipline policy. One of the things that could also be included in a discipline policy would be discussion on a performance improvement plan, or PIP. Some of you have heard that term before. So why do we need an employee discipline policy? Well, you want to have it work for you, not against you. You want to have it keep your training costs down, make sure that the employees know on the front side what's expected of them and what could happen if they violate your policies. And it's going to help you as a business protect your bottom line with that consistent and open employee discipline policy. Number 4 for our must-have documents is going to be a performance review form. So what is that? And again, some of this might sound simple on the surface, some of it might be intuitively understood, but sometimes it's good to put some specifics behind it so that you can separate it from maybe other types of documents that you may consider as an employer. So a performance review form is going to be a structured document that's going to be used by managers to formally assess an employee's job performance, their achievements, their strengths, their weaknesses over a specific period of time. It's going to help with providing consistent feedback to employees. Documenting their progress can be part of that, and also setting future development goals for raises, promotions, other improvements, things along those lines. So it actually is a useful document that does have some structure to it for hitting the items that we just discussed. It's important to have a performance review form that's used in a standard manner for performance reviews for several reasons. First, it sets up consistency and fairness. A standardized form is going to have a uniform structure that all your employees will understand for evaluation. That's going to help you reduce bias claims that could come against you potentially, and it will help employees understand they're all being assessed against the same criteria. A performance review form also provides clear documentation because it's going to create a formal written record of performance. It's going to cover things like goal setting, providing feedback, and all of those items are essential for your legal compliance in terms of not discriminating, not retaliating. You want that consistency. You want that standard met for everyone. And it's also going to help when you're assessing criteria for things like promotion decisions and if you need to manage performance issues. A performance review form also helps with targeted development of employees. If you've got specific measurable items that you're discussing with an employee for performance improvement, for example, it's going to help identify gaps in skills that they have, and it's also going to help informing the employee of what development plans or training may be implemented by the company to help them out. It also helps align performance and business goals if you've got a performance review form that you're using. The structured sections of a performance review form can go over things like goal achievement and make sure that individual employees are contributing to the organization's strategic objectives. The goal in using a performance review form, and actually for any of these must-have documents, is to make sure that you're reducing your risk of employees bringing claims against you. This is one of those documents that's going to help you lower your risk because you're going to be able to show that you've got consistent metrics and a consistent form that you're using when you're addressing performance of employees. Our number 5 must-have document is a restrictive covenant agreement. So what the heck is that? Well, a restrictive covenant agreement is a fancy way of saying that you've got a document with your employees that's going to limit some of their activities or actions during their employment and then after their employment to help protect your business interests. This is important because you want to the extent you legally can, protect your business interests. If you're going to be using a restrictive covenant agreement, again, the document that limits what an employee can do before and after employment as it relates to your business, generally the covenants that you place on them, meaning the requirements, what they can or cannot do, it has to be reasonable in time. So in a lot of places, if you're looking at restrictive covenants or covenant agreements, timeframes of 1 to 3 years are okay, but it's going to be very state specific. It's going to be very state law driven in terms of what the time frame of restrictive covenants can be for your organization. The other issue to consider is the geographic limitation of your restrictive covenant agreement that you may give to an employee. Generally speaking, the geographic limit that's placed in a restrictive covenant that affects an employee, it has to be connected to your business in some way. If you are a local company or maybe you work in a region, a geographic limit of that trade area where you do business may be okay. If you're a small or regional business and your restrictive covenant geographic location is the entire United States and you don't do business in the whole US, then maybe that piece of it with the overextended geographic limitation would not hold up. So what are some of the common restrictive covenants that would go into a restrictive covenant agreement? Well, the main ones that people have heard of and that are used most frequently would be non-compete provision, a non-solicitation provision, and a confidential information provision. So let's talk about each of those in turn. So non-competes are probably the ones that people think about the most. That's the name that comes in when you're thinking of limiting employees and what they can do once they're done working for you. Well, people who are using non-competes in this era, you need to be very careful. It's now illegal in a number of states to use a non-compete. So California, Minnesota, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Montana, Wyoming, those states except for some very, very narrow exceptions that we'll discuss, they don't allow employers to use non-competes. They have passed laws that prohibit the use of non-competes. So they're viewed, a non-compete is really viewed as against public policy because it limits somebody's ability to work in their occupational field. So the states that we just discussed, they don't like that. They have passed laws. So what are some exceptions to the states that don't allow non-competes? A couple would be if it's part of the sale of a business. Under that specific circumstance, and again, under the specific requirements of the state law, maybe you could use a non-compete for a sale of a business, or maybe you could have a non-compete for dissolution of a partnership, but it's very limited. And generally speaking, even in a state where a non-compete is not technically prohibited, they're really falling out of favor across the country. There was some action during the last federal administration to make them across the board illegal federally. So that's an issue to consider, that even if you are in a state that allows non-competes and you say had an employee that had a non-compete, you felt they were violating it, you took them to court, even though you've got the non-compete agreement, you might end up with a judge that personally doesn't like non-competes and might shoot you down on that issue or limit you. So really, non-competes are falling out of favor, as I noted, and employers are turning to different ways to protect themselves in the restrictive covenant area. So one way that has a little more acceptance would be a non-solicitation agreement. And those generally would prohibit an employee from taking either customers or clients or other employees once they leave. Those are going to have most likely more acceptance and more flexibility in being enforced instead of a non-compete, because you're not limiting somebody's ability to make a living with a non-solicit, but you are limiting them from taking your clients, for example, or taking your employees. Sometimes, depending on state law, again, a customer non-solicitation provision, depending again on state law, might be limited to customers with whom the employee actually dealt with. So it can't be, in some states, a blanket prohibition. If you leave, you can't solicit any of our clients. Some states might not allow that. Instead, they might say you can't solicit any of the clients that you actually worked with. That's just something to consider. You have better chance of enforcement with a non-solicit broadly across the country than you will with a non-compete. Another restrictive covenant that would be more widely accepted over a non-compete would be a confidential information agreement or provision. Those are generally okay, but they need to focus on truly confidential or valuable information of an employer. So think of things like trade secrets, which could be formulas, means of doing things, the information that's vital to performing your business. That type of information could likely be protected under a confidentiality agreement. Sometimes customer and client lists could be protected. Again, it depends on state law, but there is more wide use of confidentiality agreements and enforcement of those. Generally, though, a confidentiality agreement can only be used on information that's already known. So, or excuse me, information that is not known. If something is generally known out in the public, then a confidential information agreement won't protect that info. But if it's proprietary to your business, it's a trade secret, it's something that is closely important or guarded so that you can perform your business, there is a chance that that could be protected. So again, non-competes, maybe not the best, but non-solicited and confidential information restrictive covenants, you can likely have more success with those. All right, what is our sixth must-have legal document for business owners? Well, that's going to be a termination letter. Earlier, we started off with the offer letter. Now we're kind of completing the circle on the hiring and firing cycle by going through the termination letter and why it's an essential document for your business. So really, a termination letter is a formal document from the employer to the employee notifying the employee that their job is ending. As an employer, you might say, well, yeah, I fire people verbally and they're gone and I call it good. And in some cases that might be okay, but a lot of times, as we're going to talk about, use of a termination letter is a tool that can be useful to your business in helping reduce your risk overall with letting somebody go. So why do employers use a termination letter? Well, it provides clear documentation of what's going on. It can be the formal written record of the employee's separation from the company. So that's something you could drop in a personnel file on this date. You know, here's the letter, they were let go. It's going to help with reducing questions over termination in many cases, because you're going to have the date, you're going to have the circumstances, you're going to have information in there that can, again, serve as documentation. It can help clarify the reason that somebody was terminated. A lot of times it's useful to have a very brief as possible and truthful statement in a termination letter as to why someone is being let go. That helps prevent misunderstandings over a reason for termination. If you've got that transparent information in place, that can help reduce risk of a claim. If you're vague about it, people might feel something wrong happened versus, again, giving them a brief and truthful reason for termination. The termination letter can also communicate final details to an employee. So that can be things like when they're going to get their final pay, what's going to happen with their benefits, how are they going to return company property, and what other post-employment obligations might they have. For example, if they have a restrictive covenant agreement in place, as we talked about with the last essential document in the termination letter, they can be reminded of their ongoing obligations under the restrictive covenant agreement, such as relating to confidential information or non-solicitation of clients or employees. Use of a termination letter also for an employer really does help demonstrate professionalism and fair treatment. If everybody gets a termination letter, that shows that you as the employer, you're handling the process in a consistent manner and you're being professional about it. That helps show that you're not all over the map with reasoning or processes, but you're consistent, and that consistency can be useful when everyone is treated in the same manner under the same circumstances. That helps reduce risk if somebody does try to bring a claim down the road. It can also help lower risk of a potential retaliation claim. Again, if an employer is vague about why someone is getting let go, people then can be very upset about that. They may feel that they have been treated in a manner that doesn't comply with the law. If you're using a termination letter with the clear, truthful, and the truthful reason, obviously you want that to be a legally permitted reason. If that's in there, that's going to be a point that you can stand on if the employee tries to bring a claim down the road, or if there's a question, say the person has filed for unemployment insurance. If you're standing on that consistent reason for termination, your termination letter can be evidence of that reasoning. Our seventh must-have legal document for business owners is going to be a separation agreement. Again, this is a term that people maybe have heard before, but it's always worth providing just a little bit of background when we have these talks, just so that everybody is on the same page. So what is a separation agreement? They're often called a separation and release of claims agreement because they can have more than one component to them, but generally it's an agreement between an employer and an employee where an employee agrees to not sue their former employer, so they're releasing their claims, in exchange for something of value provided to them by the employer. Usually that would be a payment of some cash that they're not already entitled to, or some other benefits. So really, it's a document that the employee agrees to not sue your business in exchange for you, the employer, providing them with some continued income for a period of time, or some continued benefits, or both, or something along those lines. And if you use a separation and release of claims agreement, the employee signs it, the employee is paid the amount detailed in the document, then that's going to legally close the door on that employee for them trying to sue you for the claims that they have released in the agreement. It really does help give an employer some peace of mind that, hey, I had to pay a little bit of money to get this person to go away, but in exchange now they can't come after me because we've signed this agreement and they've been paid. So really, if you're using a separation and release of claims agreement, it's a risk mitigation document. Those claims are going to be waived. Now, not every claim can be waived in the employment sphere, but many, many, many of them can. So you're going to be disposing of a large number of employment related claims if you're using a separation and release of claims agreement. It also provides finality to the relationship. It shows that, hey, this is over. You know, the person no longer works with us. Once they're paid the agreed upon severance, they can't come back at you for the claims that they've already released in the documents. It's also a way, if you maybe didn't have a confidential information agreement already in place with an employee, like say in a restrictive covenant agreement, which we just discussed, in the separation and release of claims agreement, you could have information on protecting your confidential info in that document. That would be things like, again, your trade secrets, your proprietary data, you know, client lists, pricing, things like that. That can be addressed in a separation and release of claims agreement. You could also potentially, if you didn't have a non-solicitation agreement in place, in the separation and release of claims agreement, you could also address non-solicitation of employees, for example, or non-solicitation of clients, as allowed under state law, of course. That could be part of the separation and release of claims agreement. So that can help you as an employer continue to protect your information, protect your employees and clients as part of this arrangement with this person who's going away. And it's also going to provide clear terms and documentation of what was agreed to. You want to have information in writing of what the person is going to receive as a severance payment in exchange for their written agreement to not bring claims against you. That can really help keep things clear and prevent misunderstandings down the road. It really does offer a smooth transition. If somebody is leaving, you're a little worried about them. If you use a separation and release of claims agreement and you make that severance offer high enough to induce the person to sign, you are basically buying peace of mind. You are paying somebody to go away so that they cannot come back and bother you with a bunch of employment claims, because again, they are releasing the vast majority of claims they could bring against you in exchange for signing that document and getting that severance payment. Okay, we've got some bonus information. However, our AI overlords cut off the slide a little bit, but just for clarity, that says bonus information. So our talk is about 7 must-have legal documents for business owners, but we're also going to throw in a couple bonus documents here that are mandatory because they're required by the federal government, and they are worth discussing in the context of essential documents, because they're not necessarily forms you would get from us, but they are forms that are needed for successful running of your business. So the first is Form I-9. And that is a document that shows somebody has who they are. It shows their identity and it shows their eligibility to work in the US. So who is required to complete an I-9 form when they're coming to work for you? So all new hires in the US. It applies to every person hired to perform labor or services in exchange for wages or other payments, regardless of their citizenship status. That doesn't matter. People could still have authorization to work and not be a US citizen, but it applies to all new hires in the US. It also applies to rehired employees. If you have an employee, they leave, they come back within 3 years of their initial I-9 form being completed, you as the employer has the option to re-verify them using Supplement B of the I-9 form. Now, are there people that are excluded from having to complete an I-9 form? Yes, there are some, but that is very, very limited. Individuals who were hired on or before November 6, 1986, so that's almost 40 years ago, who have a reasonable expectation of continuous employment, they don't have to fill out or re-verify on an I-9. Employees that are hired for casual, sporadic, or irregular irregular domestic work in a private home, so not in the business setting. Independent contractors don't have to fill out an I-9, but topic for another day, you got to make sure that the person is actually an independent contractor and not an employee. You don't want a misclassification claim. They don't need to fill out an I-9 if they're truly an independent contractor. And then individuals who are not physically working in the US, they don't fill out an I-9. But those exceptions, again, are super limited. The vast majority of people who are hired in the US or rehired in the US need to fill out a Form I-9. All right, what is another essential document mandatory beyond that what we would draft for you? Well, that's a Form W-4. Again, this is another government mandated form that employers use. So upon hiring somebody, a new employee has to complete and sign a Form W-4 on their first day of work or as part of the onboarding process. The purpose of the W-4 is for the employee to talk about what their withholding will be from their pay. And an employee can and should submit a new W-4 anytime their personal or financial situation changes significantly. So if they go way up or way down in pay, they should probably submit a new W-4. And an employee should fill out a new W-4 each year if they're claiming an exemption from income tax withholding. If you have the rare employee that does that, they need to get the new W-4 form to you each year by February 15th to maintain their exempt status in the new year. That again is a rare occurrence, but it's something that could definitely come up. So another bonus item to discuss outside of our overall talk on the 7 must-have legal documents for business owners is the MyHR Council Compliance Audit Tool. So what is that? Well, that's something that we offer to our clients. It's another essential function that you can perform to kind of see where you're at in the overall compliance process with your business. So the Compliance Audit Tool is a brief online survey. It's located in our Solution Center for those of you who are our clients. And if you go in and complete that survey, you'll receive a result that's going to provide some general information on the state of your overall employment law compliance. It does address topics related to some of the essential documents that we've discussed here today. So that is a good tie-in for the documents, is having that compliance audit tool run to see where you're at. It's useful for you as a business in determining next steps in what you need to do to get up to speed with your compliance position. And use of it is also going to help lower risk because it's going to make you aware of areas where you can improve. And if you do become compliant, then you're going to greatly reduce your risk. Part of that, again, is going to be having the 7 essential documents for business owners in place. Once you've got those documents in place and you've got those other compliance areas kind of tightened up, that is going to save you in your lost time and hassle and possibly money that you could run into if you are not compliant with your employment law practices and documents. So how can MyHR Council help you out? For our clients, we can provide the documents that we just discussed. We always are helping clients with getting the 7 must-have documents in place for their business. We can draft and update critical materials for you. So if you've got essential documents in place, we can update them as needed. And we can also advise on strategies that you can use as an employer with the must-have documents. So once you've got those 7 must-have documents in place, we can advise on how they can most effectively be used. We can advise on specific situations, whether that's hiring, termination, performance management, all those sorts of things. We can get you the documents if you're a client, and we can advise on how to use them. And if you're not a client and you're interested, we've got some information on the screen here, so you can reach out to us. And I think Dan has got some final words.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. That was some great information. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thanks for everyone who's attended multiple webinars this year or taken some time out of the day to join us today. If you have any questions about these documents, as the screen said, please email us at info@myhrcouncil.com. We have more information on our website at myhrcouncil.com. If you are a client of ours and have questions about how to obtain these documents, please open up a ticket directly in our Ask an Attorney portal. This way we can have one of our attorneys work with you directly, provide you with a legally backed document for your business. If you are not a client and would like more information about how we can help you with the creation of these documents, please email us at info@myinsuredcouncil.com. We'd be happy to get a demo scheduled for you about our Ask an Attorney portal and how we can help your business. We hope that you have a wonderful holiday season and a great new year, and we hope to see you on another webinar in 2026. So have a great rest of your day, and thank you very much for attending today.
Thanks, everyone.